The morning sun cast long shadows across the small guest house as Margaret carefully folded her last silk blouse into the worn suitcase. At 58, her hands moved with the same precision that had served her well during 25 years as a financial analyst, but today they trembled slightly. Not from age, but from the weight of her son's words still echoing in her mind. "Mom, you have to understand. Sarah and I can't support another person right now. Not when you're not bringing in any income." She paused, holding the blouse against her chest. The fabric still smelled faintly of the vanilla perfume she'd worn to her last day at Morrison & Associates 3 weeks ago. The day they'd called her into the conference room with its cold fluorescent lighting and told her that after a quarter-century of dedicated service, they were restructuring. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. "Grandma Maggie?" 7-year-old Emma's voice was small, uncertain. Maggie quickly composed herself and opened the door to find her granddaughter clutching a crayon drawing. "I made this for you," Emma whispered, glancing nervously toward the main house where raised voices could be heard. "It's you and me feeding the ducks at the park." Maggie knelt down, her heart breaking anew. In the drawing, 2 stick figures with enormous smiles stood by a blue pond, surrounded by yellow ducks. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Why are you packing?" "Daddy said you have to go away because you don't have a job anymore." "But I don't understand. You're still my grandma." Before Maggie could answer, David's voice cut through the morning air. "Emma! Get back in the house. Now." The little girl's eyes filled with tears as she scurried away, leaving Maggie alone with the drawing. She tucked it carefully between her clothes, next to the small leather portfolio she never let out of her sight, the one containing documents that would shock her son if he ever bothered to look. Inside that portfolio were investment statements, stock certificates, and bank records showing a balance that had grown steadily over the decades. Every bonus she'd received, every tax refund, every dollar she could spare had been carefully invested. While David assumed she lived paycheck to paycheck in her modest apartment and later in his guest house, Maggie had been building something extraordinary. $2.3 million, to be exact. But pride and hurt kept her silent. If her own son couldn't see her worth beyond a paycheck, if he could so easily discard her when times got tough, then perhaps he needed to learn what it truly meant to struggle alone. David appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with frustration. At 32, he looked older than his years, stress lines etched around his eyes. "Mom, I found you a nice senior living facility about 20 minutes away. They have payment plans, and once you get back on your feet." "I won't be needing a facility, David." Maggie's voice was calm, steady. She closed the suitcase with a definitive click. "What do you mean?" "Mom, be realistic. You're almost 60. Who's going to hire you? You need to think practically about your future." She turned to face him, the son she'd raised alone after his father left when David was 12. The son she'd worked double shifts to put through college. The son who now looked at her with a mixture of pity and impatience. "I've always thought practically about my future, David. More than you know." Something in her tone made him pause. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across his features. But then Sarah's voice called from the house, the baby was crying, Emma was asking for breakfast, and the familiar chaos of his overwhelmed household pulled his attention away. "Look, I'll help you get settled somewhere." "But Mom, we can't do this anymore. Sarah's still on maternity leave, and with the mortgage and everything." He trailed off, unable to meet her eyes. Maggie picked up her suitcase, her purse, and the small leather portfolio. "I understand perfectly, David. You don't need to explain further." As she walked toward her old Honda Civic, she heard Emma crying from inside the house, asking why Grandma Maggie was leaving. 4-year-old Lucas joined in, his confused sobs mixing with his sister's. David followed her to the car. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be. Once you find another job, we can revisit this. But right now, you've made your position very clear." She placed her bags in the trunk, her movements deliberate and controlled. You've decided I'm a burden. That without a corporate salary, I have nothing to offer. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said, David. And more importantly, it's what you believe. She got into her car and started the engine. Through the rearview mirror, she saw Emma's face pressed against the living room window, tears streaming down her cheeks. As Maggie drove away from the house where she'd lived for the past 18 months, helping with the children while David and Sarah worked, cooking dinner most nights, and contributing her small Social Security payments to the household expenses, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Freedom. Her phone rang as she reached the end of the street. David's name flashed on the screen. She let it go to voicemail. 3 blocks away, she pulled into a parking lot and listened to his message. Mom, I know this is hard. But you'll see. This will be good for both of us. You'll find your independence again, and we'll figure things out. Maggie deleted the message and opened her banking app. The numbers on the screen would have made David's eyes widen in disbelief. But he'd chosen to see her as a liability instead of asking if she needed help or how she was really doing. Now, she thought with grim satisfaction, he would learn what it meant to manage without her, both the grandmother his children adored and the financial safety net he never knew he had. She pulled back onto the road, heading toward the luxury hotel downtown where she'd book a suite while she decided on her next move. In her rearview mirror, the house grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. But Emma's drawing remained tucked safely in her suitcase, a reminder of what she was truly fighting for. 3 days had passed since Maggie left, and the cracks in David's household were already showing. He stood in the kitchen at 6:30 a.m., attempting to make breakfast while Lucas clung to his leg, crying for Gamma Maggie. Daddy, where's Grandma? Emma asked for the 15th time since Monday, her untouched cereal growing soggy in the bowl. I told you, sweetheart. She's finding her own place to live. Adults sometimes need their independence. David's voice strained as he tried to juggle buttering toast, holding the baby, and keeping Lucas from having a complete meltdown. Sarah emerged from the bedroom, dark circles under her eyes, 3-month-old Michael wailing in her arms. He's been up all night again. I can't. David, I can't do this. When Mom was here, at least I could get some sleep. She always knew how to calm him down. The irony wasn't lost on David that they were calling her Mom now, when just a week ago Sarah had complained about Maggie's interference with their parenting. She'll visit, David said, though doubt crept into his voice. His mother hadn't returned any of his 6 phone calls. Once she gets settled somewhere. The doorbell rang, and David's heart jumped. Maybe she'd come back. Maybe she'd realized this was all unnecessary drama. Instead, he found Mrs. Patterson from next door, holding a casserole dish and wearing a concerned expression. David, dear, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is everything all right? I saw Margaret leaving with her suitcase the other day, and the children have been crying so much. Heat rose in David's cheeks. Everything's fine, Mrs. Patterson. Mom she's transitioning to a new living situation. The elderly woman's eyebrows raised. Oh. I hope she's all right. She mentioned she'd lost her job. Such a shame after all those years. She was always so proud of her work. Mrs. Patterson paused meaningfully. Of course, at her age, finding new employment might be challenging. After Mrs. Patterson left, David found himself staring at his phone. He'd assumed his mother would call by now, would need his help with something. The silence was unnerving. That afternoon, while Sarah napped and the children were finally calm, David drove past 3 senior living facilities. The cheapest one had a waiting list and required a $3,000 deposit. The others were either rundown or far too expensive for someone on Social Security. Guilt gnawed at him as he remembered his mother's calm demeanor when she left. No pleading, no arguments, no requests for more time. Just that unsettling statement, I've always thought practically about my future, David. More than you know. What had she meant by that? By Thursday evening, the household was in chaos. Sarah had developed mastitis and could barely get out of bed. Emma refused to eat anything except the grilled cheese sandwiches Maggie used to make, cutting them into perfect triangles with the crusts removed. Lucas kept asking why Grandma was mad at Daddy. David's work performance was suffering too. He missed 2 client calls while dealing with childcare emergencies and had to leave early 3 days in a row. This is temporary, he told himself as he stood in the kitchen, surrounded by dishes, trying to figure out what to feed his family. She'll call soon. But when Friday arrived with still no word from his mother, David's anxiety transformed into irritation. How could she just disappear like this? Didn't she care about her grandchildren? He decided to drive to her old apartment, thinking maybe she'd gone back there. The landlord, Mr. Kowalski, shook his head. Haven't seen Margaret in months. Good tenant, that one. Always paid early, never caused trouble. Shame what happened with her job. He studied David with sharp eyes. You're her boy, right? She talked about you and those grandkids all the time. Real proud of you. The words hit David like a physical blow. Did she say anything about where she might go? Nope. But I'll tell you what, she asked me to keep some mail forwarding going to a P.O. box downtown. Seemed like she had her plans all figured out. A P.O. box? His mother, who had always been open about everything, had gotten a P.O. box and hadn't mentioned it? That evening, David sat in his car outside the downtown post office, feeling foolish. What was he going to do, break in and search for his mother's box? He didn't even know the number. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, "Baby won't stop crying. Emma's asking for Grandma again. I can't handle this much longer." As he drove home, David passed the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. Through the large windows of the restaurant, he caught a glimpse of an older woman with silver hair, wearing an elegant navy dress, dining alone while reading what looked like financial documents. The woman looked remarkably like his mother. But that was impossible. His mother shopped at discount stores and clipped coupons. She'd never eaten at a place like the Ritz-Carlton in her life. He slowed down, trying to get a better look, but a taxi honked behind him, forcing him to move on. Still, the image nagged at him. The woman's posture, the way she held her head when concentrating, it had been so familiar. When he arrived home, he found Sarah crying at the kitchen table, Michael screaming in his carrier, and both older children having meltdowns. "I can't do this without her," Sarah sobbed. "I don't know how we managed before she moved in. She made everything work. The kids listened to her, she helped with meals, she even balanced our checkbook better than we did." David felt a cold realization settling in his stomach. They hadn't just lost a babysitter or a helpful family member. They'd lost the backbone of their household, and he was only now beginning to understand how much his mother had been holding together. "Maybe I should call her again," he said quietly. "You think she'll answer this time?" David looked at his phone, at the list of ignored calls, and for the first time since this began, he wondered if his mother's silence wasn't about pride or hurt feelings. What if it was about something else entirely? What if the woman he'd dismissed as financially desperate was teaching him a lesson he wasn't prepared to learn? Outside, Mrs. Patterson's words echoed in his mind, she was always so proud of her work. And his mother's cryptic statement, "I've always thought practically about my future." As he dialed her number once more, listening to it ring unanswered, David couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a terrible mistake, one that went far deeper than simply asking his mother to move out. But by then, it might already be too late to fix it. 2 weeks had passed since Maggie left, and David's world was unraveling faster than he could manage. He sat in his supervisor's office on Monday morning, watching Mark Henderson's face grow increasingly stern. "David, this is the 3rd time this month you've missed a major deadline. The Morrison account specifically requested you, but if you can't deliver consistent work, I'll have to reassign it." "I understand, Mark. It's just family circumstances. My mother recently." David trailed off, unsure how to explain without sounding pathetic. "Look, I get it. We all have personal issues. But the company can't suffer because of them. Take the rest of the week to sort things out. Come back Monday ready to perform, or we'll need to discuss other options. The threat was clear. David's job, already stressful with the mortgage and bills, was now hanging by a thread. When he arrived home early, he found chaos waiting. Sarah sat on the living room floor, still in her pajamas at 2 p.m., surrounded by crying children and unpaid bills scattered across the coffee table. The daycare called, she said without looking up. Emma bit another child because she's angry about Grandma leaving. They want us to pick her up early again. She held up a stack of envelopes. And these came today. The electricity bill is overdue, the mortgage payment bounced, and the pediatrician wants payment before Michael's next appointment. David stared at the bills in horror. The mortgage bounced? How is that possible? Because we're spending $300 more per month on groceries and childcare without your mother's help. She used to buy groceries, cook most meals, and watch the kids. Do you have any idea how much money she was saving us? The answer hit David like a punch to the gut. He'd never calculated his mother's financial contribution beyond her small monthly payment. The meals she prepared, the babysitting that let Sarah work part-time, the household management that kept their lives organized, it had been worth thousands of dollars monthly. I'll call the bank about the mortgage, he said weakly. With what money, David? And what about next month? And the month after that? That evening, David swallowed his pride and drove to his mother's old haunts, hoping to find her. The library where she'd volunteered was closed. The community center where she taught financial literacy classes hadn't seen her. Even the small church she occasionally attended had no information. It was as if she'd vanished completely. On his way home, he stopped at the Ritz-Carlton. The same restaurant where he'd glimpsed that familiar figure a week ago. The maitre d' was polite but unhelpful. I'm sorry, sir. We don't discuss our guests' personal information. But if someone were staying here long-term, hypothetically, what would that cost? The man's eyebrows raised slightly. Our extended stay suites start at $800 per night. David's blood ran cold. $800 per night was more than his mother's entire monthly Social Security check. As he walked back to his car, his phone rang. Unknown number. Is this David Chin? The voice was professional, female. Yes, who's this? This is Janet Martinez from Sunset Manor Senior Living. Your mother submitted an application and listed you as her emergency contact. We're calling to inform you that her application has been approved and she can move in as early as next week. David's heart sank. She was really doing this. Really moving into senior housing like she was giving up on life. However, the woman continued, there's been an unusual situation. Your mother paid the entire first year's rent in advance, plus a substantial security deposit. Cash payment. I've never seen anything like it in 15 years of working here. Cash payment? How much? I'm not at liberty to discuss specific amounts, but I can tell you it's significant. Is your mother perhaps recently divorced? Sometimes older adults receive large settlement payments. David hung up, his mind racing. Where would his mother get cash for a year's rent in advance? Her Social Security barely covered basic expenses. Unless. That night, he couldn't sleep. Sarah was up with the baby again, Emma had wet the bed twice, and Lucas refused to sleep without his Gamma Maggie story. But beyond the immediate chaos, something else nagged at David's mind. His mother's words kept replaying, I've always thought practically about my future, David. More than you know. The next morning, driven by desperation and growing suspicion, David did something he'd never done before. He called his mother's former employer. Morrison and Associates, how may I help you? Hi, this is David Chin. My mother, Margaret Chin, worked there for 25 years before the recent layoffs. I'm trying to reach someone in HR about her final paperwork. After being transferred twice, he reached a sympathetic woman named Carol. Oh, Margaret. Such a loss for our company. She was one of our most valued analysts. Is everything all right? I'm just trying to understand her severance package. For planning purposes. Well, I can't give specifics, but I can tell you she received the maximum payout. 25 years of service, plus her accumulated vacation time, plus the voluntary early retirement bonus. She was also fully vested in our 401k program. Carol paused. Your mother was very smart with her investments, you know. She maximized every company matching program we offered. After hanging up, David sat in stunned silence. Severance package. 401k, investment programs. These weren't terms he associated with his mother, who'd always lived so modestly. That afternoon, while Sarah napped and the children were occupied, David did something that felt like a violation but which he couldn't resist. He searched online for any public records associated with his mother's name. What he found made his hands shake. Property records showed his mother had owned, not rented, her apartment. She'd bought it 15 years ago and paid it off early. The sale price, just 6 months ago, was $340,000. Tax records, visible through public databases, showed investment income that made David's salary look modest. Real estate transactions revealed she'd bought and sold 3 rental properties over the past decade, each time at significant profit. His mother, the woman he'd assumed was financially dependent, the woman he'd asked to leave because she couldn't contribute, was worth more money than David had ever dreamed of having. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. David, this is your mother. The children may visit me at Sunset Manor starting Saturday, if they'd like. Visiting hours are 2 to 4 p.m. You are welcome to drop them off. No emotion. No warmth. Just a formal invitation that felt like a knife twisting in his chest. He stared at the message, then at the property record still open on his laptop screen, then at the bills scattered across his coffee table. His mother hadn't just left them when he asked her to go. She'd been letting him destroy his own family while she watched, financially secure and completely independent, waiting to see if he'd realize his mistake before it was too late. The question now was whether it already was too late, and whether the lesson she was teaching him was worth the price they were all paying. As Emma's voice called from the bedroom, asking when Grandma was coming home, David realized he might be about to find out. Saturday afternoon arrived gray and drizzling, matching David's mood as he drove Emma and Lucas to Sunset Manor. The children had been buzzing with excitement all morning, Emma clutching a new drawing she'd made and Lucas carrying his favorite stuffed elephant. Is Grandma Maggie going to come home with us? Lucas asked for the 10th time, his 4-year-old voice hopeful. David caught his son's eyes in the rearview mirror. No, buddy. She lives there now. But you'll get to visit her. Why can't she live with us anymore? Emma's voice was smaller, more thoughtful than her brother's. The question David had been dreading. How could he explain to a 7-year-old that he'd made the worst mistake of his life? That he'd thrown away the most important person in their family because of his own pride and stupidity? Sometimes grown-ups make decisions that they later wish they could change, he said carefully. Sunset Manor was nothing like the depressing facility David had imagined. The building was modern, with large windows and well-maintained gardens. The lobby felt more like an upscale hotel than a senior home, with comfortable seating areas and soft classical music playing. At the reception desk, a friendly woman named Patricia smiled at the children. You must be here to see Mrs. Chin. She's been so excited about your visit. She's in the sunroom on the 3rd floor. As they rode the elevator up, David's stomach churned with nerves. He hadn't seen his mother in 3 weeks, hadn't heard her voice except for that brief, formal text message. Part of him hoped she'd welcome him back with open arms. Another part feared she'd look right through him. The sunroom was bright and airy, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a small lake. His mother sat at a table near the window, wearing a soft lavender cardigan he'd never seen before, reading what appeared to be a financial magazine. She looked peaceful. Rested. Nothing like the stressed, worried woman who'd been walking on eggshells in his house. "Grandma Maggie!" Emma broke free from David's hand and ran across the room. Maggie's face transformed instantly, lighting up with pure joy as she gathered Emma into her arms. "My sweet girl. Oh, how I've missed you." Lucas followed, scrambling onto her lap with his elephant. "Gamma, look. Mr. Peanuts missed you too." For several minutes, David stood awkwardly by the entrance, watching his mother shower the children with attention. She admired Emma's drawing, listened intently to Lucas's rambling story about a caterpillar he'd found, and answered their rapid-fire questions about her new home. Finally, she looked up at him. Her expression was polite but distant, as if he were a stranger who'd wandered into a private moment. "Hello, David." "Hi, Mom." He approached the table slowly. "How are you, settling in?" "Very well, thank you. The staff here is excellent, and I've made some lovely friends." She gestured toward a group of older adults playing cards in the corner. "We have book clubs, investment seminars, even cooking classes." Investment seminars. The words hung in the air between them. "Mom, David started, then stopped. The children were right there, and this conversation felt too important, too fragile, for little ears. As if reading his mind, Maggie stood. "Emma, Lucas, would you like to see the game room? They have puzzles and building blocks." She led them down the hall to a cheerful room filled with activities. After getting them settled with a volunteer named Mrs. Rodriguez, she returned to David, her expression serious. "Walk with me," she said simply. They strolled through the facility's halls in silence until they reached a quiet sitting area overlooking the gardens. Maggie settled into a chair and looked at him expectantly. David had rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but now that it was here, the words felt inadequate. "Mom, I made a mistake." "Yes, you did." Her directness stunned him. No attempt to make this easier, no maternal comfort. Just truth. "I've been doing some research," he continued, his voice growing smaller. "About your finances. I found the property records, the sale of your apartment." "And what did you conclude from your research?" "That I'm an idiot. That I threw you out of our house when you were probably more financially secure than we are. That I judged you based on assumptions instead of asking if you needed help or how you were really doing." Maggie nodded slowly. "Those are all accurate observations. But why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say something when I was being so stupid?" For the first time, emotion flickered across her face. "Because, David, I needed to know what kind of man I'd raised. I needed to know if you'd see me as valuable only when I was contributing money to your household, or if you'd love and support me because I'm your mother." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Of course I love you. Money has nothing to do with it. Doesn't it?" Her voice was quiet but firm. "You asked me to leave the moment you thought I couldn't contribute financially. You didn't ask if I was okay, if I was scared about losing my job, if I needed emotional support during a difficult time. Your first instinct was to protect your own financial interests." David felt tears burning his eyes. "You're right. God, Mom, you're absolutely right. I was scared about money, about the mortgage, about providing for Sarah and the kids, and I..." "You what?" "I panicked. And instead of talking to you, instead of asking for help or figuring out a solution together, I threw you away like you were disposable." Maggie was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain streak down the windows. "Do you know what hurt the most, David?" It wasn't being asked to leave. It was realizing that after 25 years of working, saving, and building a secure future, my own son saw me as a burden the moment I hit a bump in the road. I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. And I don't know how to fix it. The question isn't how to fix it, she said gently. The question is whether you've learned from it. David looked at his mother, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Not as the woman who helped with babysitting and household chores, but as Margaret Chin, the financial analyst who'd built a small fortune through careful planning and smart investments. The woman who'd raised him alone after his father left. The woman who'd worked double shifts to pay for his college education. I have learned from it. I've learned that I took you for granted in every possible way. I've learned that I don't know you as well as I thought I did. And I've learned that I'm not half the man you raised me to be. Maggie's eyes softened slightly. That's a start. Is it enough? Is there any way you can forgive me? She reached over and took his hand, the first physical contact they'd had since she left. David, you're my son. I'll always love you. But trust has to be rebuilt. From down the hall, they could hear Emma's laughter and Lucas calling for his grandmother. The sound seemed to bridge the distance between them, a reminder of what they were both fighting for. The children miss you terribly, David said. We all do. The house feels empty without you. I miss them too. More than you know. Would you consider coming back? Not to help with bills or babysitting, but because you're family. Because we love you and want you with us. Maggie squeezed his hand gently. That's not a decision I can make today, David. But it's the first time you've asked the right question. As they walked back toward the game room to collect the children, David felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. The drive home from Sunset Manor was quiet except for the children's chatter about their visit with Grandma Maggie. David's mind churned with everything his mother had said, but underneath the hope he'd felt at the facility, a growing dread was taking root. How was he going to explain this to Sarah? When they arrived home, Sarah was waiting in the living room, baby Michael finally sleeping in her arms. Her expression was a mixture of exhaustion and barely contained frustration. How did it go? She asked, her voice carefully controlled. Good. The kids had a great time. Mom seems settled. Settled. Sarah's laugh was bitter. That's nice for her. Meanwhile, I've been dealing with calls from the bank about our mortgage, the credit card company about our late payment, and the daycare threatening to drop Emma if we don't pay this week's fees. David felt his stomach clench. Sarah, there's something I need to tell you about Mom. What now? Is she asking for money? Because we literally don't have any to give her. No, it's the opposite. David sat down heavily on the couch. She doesn't need our money. She never did. Sarah stared at him blankly. What are you talking about? David explained everything he'd discovered: the property records, the investment income, the substantial severance package, the cash payment for her apartment at Sunset Manor. With each revelation, Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching anger. Wait, she said when he finished. You're telling me your mother is wealthy? Like, actually wealthy? It appears that way, yes. And she let us struggle? She watched us worry about money, watched me stress about going back to work early, watched you nearly lose your job, and she said nothing? David could see the fury building in his wife's eyes. Sarah, you have to understand. Understand what? That your mother has been playing some sick game with our family? That she could have helped us this whole time but chose not to? She was teaching me a lesson. A lesson? Sarah's voice rose, causing the baby to stir. What kind of lesson involves letting her grandchildren suffer? What kind of person watches a family struggle when they could help? The kind of person whose son threw her out the moment he thought she was financially useless, David said quietly. Sarah's anger faltered for a moment, but then flared again. So this is your fault too? You made her leave, and now she's punishing all of us for your mistake? I think she's trying to show me what really matters. What really matters? David, Emma's been crying herself to sleep every night. Lucas keeps asking why Grandma doesn't love us anymore. I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time in weeks. And you're telling me this is all some elaborate life lesson? David didn't have an answer for that. When he thought about his mother's comfortable suite at Sunset Manor, her peaceful demeanor, her new friends and activities, it was hard to reconcile with the chaos his family was enduring. The next few days brought fresh catastrophes. David's supervisor called an emergency meeting to discuss his performance. The daycare officially dropped Emma due to unpaid fees, forcing Sarah to juggle all 3 children while David worked. The electricity was shut off for 6 hours before David could scrape together the overdue payment. Through it all, Sarah's resentment toward Maggie grew like a cancer. "She's selfish," Sarah declared on Wednesday night as they ate dinner by candlelight because they couldn't afford to turn the lights back on yet. "I don't care what lesson she thinks she's teaching. A decent person doesn't let children suffer to make a point." Emma looked up from her peanut butter sandwich. "Mommy, why are you mad at Grandma Maggie?" "Because she..." Sarah caught herself, glancing at David. "Because sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt other people." That night, after the children were finally asleep, Sarah confronted David directly. "I want you to go back there and tell your mother exactly what's happening to this family. Tell her about Emma getting kicked out of daycare. Tell her about me having to choose between buying diapers and groceries. Tell her about Lucas asking why the lights don't work." Sarah. "No, David. I understand you made a mistake. I understand she was hurt. But this has gone too far. She's not just punishing you anymore. She's punishing innocent children who love her and don't understand why she abandoned them." David knew Sarah was right on some level, but the conversation with his mother had felt too important, too fragile, to rush. She said trust has to be rebuilt. Maybe this is part of that process. Trust? Sarah's voice was incredulous. What about our trust in her? What about the children's trust? Emma drew that picture of her and your mom at the duck pond because she believed love was unconditional. Now she's learning that even grandmothers will abandon you if your daddy makes them angry. The words stung because they carried truth. David had seen the change in his children, the way they'd become clingy and anxious, the way Emma now asked, "Are you leaving too?" whenever he went to work. On Thursday, desperation drove David to make a decision he'd been avoiding. He called his mother directly. "Hello, David." Her voice was warm but cautious. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "I'm listening." "Are you teaching me a lesson, or are you punishing my family?" There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean Emma's been kicked out of daycare because we can't pay. I mean Sarah's having panic attacks about money. I mean Lucas thinks you stopped loving us. And meanwhile, you're comfortable and settled and seemingly fine with watching us struggle." Another pause, longer this time. "David, I never intended for the children to suffer. But you knew they would. You knew that asking me to figure this out on my own meant they'd be affected too." For the first time since this began, his mother sounded uncertain. "I thought you'd find a way to manage. I thought you'd ask for help from friends, or figure out a budget, or come crawling back to you, begging forgiveness. That's not what I wanted. Isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're enjoying watching me fail. Like you're proving a point at my children's expense." The silence stretched between them until David wondered if she'd hung up. Finally, she spoke, her voice smaller than he'd heard it in weeks. "I need some time to think about what you've said." After she hung up, David sat in his dark kitchen, wondering if he'd just destroyed the fragile progress they'd made, or if he'd finally said what needed to be said. Outside, rain began to fall again, and somewhere in the house, one of his children started crying. He'd asked his mother to choose between her lesson and her family. Now he could only wait to see which one mattered more to her. Friday morning brought the call David had been dreading. His supervisor's voice was apologetic but firm. "David, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to let you go. The Morrison account pulled out yesterday, and with your recent performance issues." David sat in his car in the company parking lot, staring at the cardboard box containing his desk belongings. For weeks after asking his mother to leave, he was unemployed, facing foreclosure, and watching his family disintegrate. The irony was suffocating. When he arrived home, Sarah took one look at his face and the box in his hands, and her composure finally cracked completely. "No," she whispered, sinking onto the couch. "No, no, no. David, tell me you didn't lose your job." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Sarah." She buried her face in her hands and began to sob. Not the frustrated tears he'd seen over the past weeks, but deep, broken sobs that seemed to come from somewhere primal. Emma appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas at noon because there was no daycare to get ready for. "Mommy? Why are you crying?" "Daddy lost his job," Sarah said through her tears, not bothering to shield the children from the reality anymore. "We don't have any money, and I don't know what we're going to do." Lucas toddled over and patted Sarah's knee with his small hand. "It's okay, Mommy. Gamma Maggie will help us." The innocent statement hit like a lightning bolt. Sarah's sobs stopped abruptly, replaced by something harder, more desperate. "No, baby. Grandma Maggie won't help us. She could, but she won't." "Sarah, don't," David started. "Don't what? Don't tell them the truth? That their grandmother is rich and comfortable while they're going to lose their house? That she's choosing to teach their daddy a lesson instead of caring about them?" Emma's eyes grew wide with confusion. "Grandma Maggie is rich?" "Very rich," Sarah said bitterly. "Rich enough to live in a fancy place and pay for everything in cash. Rich enough to help us, but she's decided not to." David watched his daughter's face crumple as she tried to process this information. In her 7-year-old mind, the equation was simple: Grandma had money, they needed money, but Grandma wasn't sharing. Therefore, Grandma didn't love them enough to help. But why? Emma's voice was small and broken. "Why won't she help us?" David knelt down and gathered both children close. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Daddy made some mistakes, and now we're all trying to figure out how to fix them." But Emma pulled away, her face flushed with anger that looked startlingly mature on her young features. "I hate her. I hate Grandma Maggie. She's mean and I don't want to see her anymore." Lucas began crying, not understanding the words but feeling the emotional weight in the room. Sarah continued weeping, and David felt like he was drowning in the wreckage of his family. That afternoon, while Sarah took the children to her sister's house for the weekend, David made a decision that felt like surrendering. He drove to Sunset Manor. His mother wasn't in the sunroom this time. She was in her private suite, a spacious apartment with a kitchenette, sitting area, and bedroom. The furnishings were elegant, the view of the lake peaceful. It looked like a luxury hotel room, not a senior living facility. "David," she said when she opened the door. She looked tired, older somehow than she had just days before. "I wasn't expecting you. I lost my job today." The words hung between them. His mother's face went pale, and she stepped aside to let him in. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I didn't think it would go that far." "Didn't you? You knew I was struggling at work. You knew the stress was affecting my performance. What did you think would happen?" Maggie sat down heavily in her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 58 years. "I thought you'd ask for help. From friends, from Sarah's family, from me. I did ask for help. I called you multiple times. You ignored every call. I meant real help. Not just expecting me to come back and fix everything while you learned nothing." David stared at his mother, this woman who'd raised him to be better than this, who'd sacrificed so much for his future, and felt something inside him break. "Emma says she hates you now," he said quietly. "She says you're mean for not helping us when you could. And you know what? I can't argue with her anymore." His mother flinched as if he'd slapped her. "I understand that I hurt you," David continued. "I understand that I needed to learn a lesson about taking people for granted. But Mom, you're hurting innocent children to make your point. You're letting your grandchildren think you don't love them enough to help them. That's not what I wanted. But it's what's happening. Sarah's having a breakdown. The kids are traumatized. I've lost my job and we're going to lose the house. And you're sitting here in your comfortable apartment, surrounded by luxury, while your family falls apart." Maggie's hands trembled as she reached for a tissue. "I never meant for it to go this far. I thought you'd come to me sooner. I thought we'd have this conversation weeks ago. Well, we're having it now. So I'm asking you directly, will you help us? Not as a lesson, not as a test, but because we're your family and we need you?" His mother was quiet for a long time, staring out at the lake. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I don't know if I can trust you not to hurt me again." The honesty of it cut through David's anger. "And I don't know if I can trust you to put your grandchildren before your pride." They sat in silence, two people who loved each other but had broken something precious between them. Outside, the late afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the elegant room. "The children are at Sarah's sister's house this weekend," David said finally. "When they come back, I'm going to have to tell them we're losing the house. I'm going to have to explain why Daddy can't provide for them anymore." He stood to leave, then turned back one more time. "I know I started this. I know I'm the one who made the first terrible mistake. But if you let this continue, if you let those children lose their home while you have the power to prevent it, then you're making a choice too. And it's not a choice the mother who raised me would make." Walking back to his car, David felt a strange sense of finality. He'd laid everything on the table, his failures, his desperation, his love for his children, and his disappointment in the woman who'd taught him to be better than this. Now the ball was in his mother's court. As he drove home to his dark, cold house, David realized that sometimes the worst part of hitting rock bottom wasn't the falling, it was discovering that the people you thought would catch you had chosen to step aside and watch you land. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, matching the emptiness David felt as he sat alone in his kitchen, staring at foreclosure notices and past due bills scattered across the table. Sarah and the children were still at her sister's house, and the silence was deafening. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, "Kids asking when they can come home. Don't know what to tell them." David was typing a response when his doorbell rang. Through the peephole, he saw an elderly woman he didn't recognize, holding a covered dish. "Mr. Chen? I'm Eleanor Walsh from Sunset Manor. I'm a friend of your mother's." Eleanor was perhaps 75, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple blue coat and carried herself with quiet dignity. "I hope you don't mind me coming by," she continued when David opened the door. "Margaret asked me to bring you this." She held out the dish. "It's her famous beef stew. She made it in the community kitchen yesterday." David accepted the warm dish, confused. Thank you. But I'm not sure why. May I come in for a moment? I think there are some things you should know about your mother." They sat in David's living room, Eleanor's sharp eyes taking in the stack of bills, the toys scattered around, the general air of a household in crisis. "Your mother has been my neighbor at Sunset Manor for 3 weeks now," Eleanor began. "She's a lovely woman, but she's been carrying a tremendous weight. She talks about you and your children constantly." "She does?" "Oh, yes. She has pictures of Emma and Lucas all over her apartment. She knows Emma's favorite books by heart and can tell you exactly how Lucas likes his sandwiches cut." Eleanor paused. She also cries every night. David felt his chest tighten. Cries? The walls aren't that thick, dear. She tries to be quiet about it, but I hear her. She second-guesses every decision she's made, worries constantly about whether she's doing the right thing. Eleanor leaned forward. Yesterday, she told me something that I think you need to hear. David waited, hardly breathing. She said she's been testing herself as much as she's been testing you. She wanted to see if she was strong enough to live independently, if she could build a life outside of being needed by her family. But she's discovering that independence isn't the same as isolation. I don't understand. Your mother spent 25 years defining herself by how much she could give to others. Her work, her savings, her caregiving, it was all about providing for and protecting other people. When you asked her to leave, it forced her to ask herself who she was when nobody needed her. Eleanor stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gray morning. She's been learning that having financial security doesn't mean much if you don't have people to share it with. And she's been realizing that teaching lessons isn't worth losing the people you love. Then why hasn't she called? Why hasn't she helped? Because she's scared, David. She's scared that if she comes back now, you'll only want her for her money. She's scared that you've learned to see her as a bank account instead of a mother. Eleanor turned back to him. And frankly, after our conversation yesterday, I think she's also scared that she's waited too long to fix this. David's phone rang, interrupting them. Unknown number again. Mr. Chen? This is Patricia from Sunset Manor. I'm calling because your mother collapsed in her room this morning. She's been taken to St. Mary's Hospital. The dish of stew crashed to the floor as David bolted upright, his heart hammering against his ribs. 20 minutes later, David and Eleanor rushed through the hospital's emergency room doors. A doctor met them in the waiting area, a young woman with tired eyes and scrubs. Are you Margaret Chen's family? She's stable now, but she suffered what appears to be an anxiety attack. Her blood pressure spiked dangerously high, and she was dehydrated. Can we see her? She's resting, but yes. Room 247. David found his mother in a hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile than he'd ever seen her. And Ford drip fed into her arm, and monitors beeped softly around her. Her eyes were closed, but she opened them when she heard footsteps. David. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. He pulled a chair close to her bed and took her hand. Mom, what happened? Are you okay? I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what you said, about Emma hating me, about the children losing their house. She tried to sit up, but David gently pressed her back down. Don't worry about that now. Just rest. No, I can't rest. David, I've made a terrible mistake. Tears began flowing down her cheeks. I thought I was being strong, thought I was teaching important lessons, but I've been selfish. I've been punishing children who don't deserve it because I was hurt and angry. Mom. Please, let me finish. I love you, and I love Emma and Lucas and even little Michael more than my own life. I've been sitting in that beautiful apartment, surrounded by everything money can buy, and I've been miserable because none of it matters without family. David felt his own tears starting. I love you too, Mom. And I'm sorry for everything I said, everything I did. You were right to call me out yesterday. You were right to tell me I was choosing pride over family. I spent so many years building financial security because I never wanted to be dependent on anyone again after your father left. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that security isn't just about money, it's about having people who love you unconditionally. She squeezed his hand weakly. I want to come home, David. Not to your house, necessarily, but to your life. I want to be Emma's grandmother who makes terrible jokes and cuts her sandwiches into triangles. I want to be Lucas's Gamma who reads him bedtime stories and teaches him to feed ducks at the park. What about trust? What about rebuilding? Trust is built through actions, not tests. And my actions for the past month have been terrible. She looked directly into his eyes. If you'll let me, I want to start making better choices. For all of us. David leaned down and hugged his mother carefully, mindful of the 4 lines. I want that too. More than anything. As they held each other, David felt something shift inside his chest. Not forgiveness, that would take time, but hope. The possibility that they could find their way back to each other, that the damage could be repaired. There's something else, his mother said when they separated. I've been thinking about what kind of legacy I want to leave. Not just money, but values. Love. Family support. She smiled weakly. I think it's time I started showing Emma and Lucas what those things really look like. Outside the hospital window, the gray clouds were beginning to break apart, letting through the first rays of sunshine David had seen in weeks. It felt like the beginning of something new. The hospital released Maggie Sunday afternoon with strict instructions to rest and avoid stress. David drove her back to Sunset Manor, where she insisted on packing her belongings immediately. Mom, the doctor said you need to take it easy, David protested as she folded clothes with determined efficiency. I've rested enough. I've been resting while my family fell apart. She paused, holding one of Emma's drawings that she'd kept on her nightstand. I need to face Sarah and the children. I need to own what I've done. The drive to David's house was tense. Maggie sat quietly in the passenger seat, occasionally touching the envelope in her purse that contained cashier's checks, one to cover the overdue mortgage and bills, another for a college fund for the children, and a third for general family expenses. Are you sure about this approach? David asked as they pulled into his driveway. Maybe we should ease into it. No more easing, David. No more games or lessons or pride. Just truth. Sarah's sister's car was already in the driveway. Through the front window, David could see Emma and Lucas playing on the living room floor while Sarah and her sister Jennifer sat on the couch, looking serious. When David and Maggie walked through the front door together, the house went completely silent. Emma looked up from her coloring book, her face cycling through confusion, anger, and hope in rapid succession. Lucas dropped his toy truck and stared. Sarah stood slowly, her expression guarded and cold. Well, Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled. Look who decided to visit. Sarah, Maggie said quietly. I know you're angry with me. You have every right to be. Do I? Because I wasn't sure if I had any rights at all in this situation. Sarah's composure was cracking. I wasn't sure if I was allowed to be angry that my children's grandmother abandoned them when they needed her most. Jennifer gathered the children and quietly led them upstairs, sensing the coming storm. Once they were alone, Sarah's anger erupted like a dam bursting. Do you have any idea what the last month has been like? Do you know what it's like to tell your 7-year-old daughter that there's no money for groceries? To watch your husband lose his job because he's so stressed he can't function? To see your children cry themselves to sleep asking why grandma doesn't love them anymore? Maggie absorbed each word like a physical blow, tears streaming down her face. I know. I hurt them. I hurt all of you. You didn't just hurt us, you betrayed us. Sarah's voice rose. We trusted you. We loved you like a mother. And when we needed you most, you chose to play mind games instead of being there for your family. Sarah, please, David started. No, David. She needs to hear this. Sarah turned back to Maggie. Emma drew you a picture every single day you were gone. Every day. She'd ask me to mail them to you, and I had to tell her I didn't know where you were. Do you know what that did to her? Do you know she thinks it's her fault you left? Maggie sank onto the couch, sobbing openly now. I never wanted to hurt the children. I thought I was protecting them from having a grandmother they'd eventually resent for being dependent. Dependent? Sarah's laugh was bitter. You were never dependent. You were the glue that held this family together, and we were too stupid to realize it until you were gone. Sarah, I have money. I've always had money. I could have prevented all of this suffering. I know about your money. Sarah shouted. David told me everything. And that makes it so much worse. You watched your grandchildren go without, watched your son lose his job, watched this family disintegrate, and you had the power to stop it the entire time. The house shook with Sarah's rage, years of stress and weeks of desperation pouring out in a torrent of words. I worked myself to exhaustion taking care of 3 children alone. I had panic attacks about losing our house. I watched Emma get kicked out of daycare and blamed myself for not being able to afford it. And you were living in luxury, getting spa treatments and attending book clubs while we suffered. That's not. I wasn't enjoying it. I was miserable every day. Oh, you were miserable in your beautiful apartment with room service and no responsibilities? How terrible for you. Maggie stood up, her own voice rising for the first time. You think this was easy for me? You think I enjoyed being away from my grandchildren? You think I slept peacefully knowing you were struggling? I don't know what you enjoyed. I don't know who you are anymore. I'm a woman who made a terrible mistake. Maggie's voice cracked. I'm a mother who was so hurt by her son's rejection that she forgot what really mattered. I'm a grandmother who loves those children more than her own life and who has been dying inside every day since I left them. The 2 women faced each other across the living room, both breathing hard, both crying. I don't know how to forgive you, Sarah whispered. I don't know how to trust you again. I don't know either, Maggie admitted. But I'm willing to spend the rest of my life trying to earn it back. She reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope of checks, setting it on the coffee table. This doesn't fix anything. It doesn't undo the hurt or the fear or the damage I've caused. But it's a start. Sarah stared at the envelope without touching it. I don't want your money. It's not about the money. It's about me finally putting my family before my pride. It's about me admitting that I was wrong and trying to make it right. From upstairs, they could hear Lucas calling for his gamma, his small voice plaintive and confused. He's been asking for you every night, Sarah said quietly. They both have. I know. And I know I don't deserve to see them after what I've put them through. But Sarah, if you'll let me, I want to try to be the grandmother they need. Not the one who tests their parents or teaches harsh lessons, but the one who shows up and loves them unconditionally. Sarah wiped her eyes, her anger finally beginning to transform into exhaustion. How do I know you won't leave again the next time you get hurt or offended? Because I've learned that leaving doesn't protect anyone. It just creates more pain. Maggie looked directly at Sarah. And because I've learned that being right isn't as important as being present. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Finally, Sarah spoke. The children can see you. But not here. Not yet. I need time to process this, and they need to understand that actions have consequences, even for grandmothers. Maggie nodded, relief and gratitude evident on her face. Whatever you think is best. Whatever timeline you need. And the money stays in that envelope until we decide together how to handle it. No more unilateral decisions. Agreed. As if sensing the shift in atmosphere, Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her face uncertain. Is Grandma Maggie coming home? She asked quietly. Maggie looked at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I'm trying to come home, sweetheart, Maggie called up to her granddaughter. If you and Mommy and Daddy will let me. Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile David had seen from her in weeks. Can you make grilled cheese triangles again? Through her tears, Maggie laughed. All the grilled cheese triangles you want, my love. 3 weeks later, on a crisp October afternoon, Maggie sat in the park watching Emma feed ducks at the pond. The same park from Emma's drawing, the one that had stayed tucked in Maggie's suitcase through all the dark weeks at Sunset Manor. Lucas ran up with a handful of breadcrumbs, his face flushed with excitement. "Gamma, look! The baby duck likes me." "He does indeed," Maggie said, pulling him close for a hug. "You have a very gentle way with animals, just like your mama." The transition back hadn't been easy. Sarah had insisted on family counseling sessions, where a patient therapist named Dr. Martinez helped them work through the layers of hurt and miscommunication that had built up over the years. They'd discovered that the problems went deeper than just the month of separation. There had been unspoken expectations, unacknowledged resentments, and assumptions on all sides. "I always felt like I had to prove I was worthy of being in your lives," Maggie had admitted during one particularly difficult session. "When David asked me to leave, it confirmed my worst fear, that I was only valuable as long as I was useful. And I felt like I could never live up to the sacrifices you made for me," David had responded. "When financial pressure hit, I panicked and pushed away the person who could have helped me most, because I was ashamed of needing help." Sarah's healing was taking longer. She'd been the most wounded by Maggie's absence, watching her children suffer while knowing their grandmother had the power to help. But slowly, through honest conversations and consistent presence, trust was rebuilding. Today was special because it was the first time Maggie was babysitting alone since coming back. David and Sarah had gone to a job interview together. David had found a position with better pay and more stability, partly thanks to a reference from one of Maggie's former colleagues at Morrison and Associates. "Grandma," Emma said, settling beside her on the bench. "Are you going to leave again?" The question Maggie had been dreading but knew would come eventually. She turned to face her granddaughter fully. "No, sweetheart. I made a terrible mistake when I left before. I was hurt and angry, and I made bad choices because of those feelings. But what if Daddy makes you mad again?" Maggie considered her words carefully. "If Daddy and I have problems again, and sometimes families do have problems, we're going to talk about them instead of running away. I've learned that leaving doesn't solve anything. It just creates more hurt." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Can we go see your new apartment after the park?" Maggie had moved out of Sunset Manor into a cozy 2-bedroom apartment just 10 minutes from David's house. Close enough to help regularly, far enough to maintain independence. The second bedroom was decorated as a space for the grandchildren, with bunk beds and toy boxes and a reading corner. "Of course. And I have something special to show you there." An hour later, they climbed the stairs to Maggie's apartment. The space was warm and inviting, filled with family photos and the children's artwork. But what Emma gasped at was the wall in the hallway, covered with every single drawing and card the children had made over the years. "You kept them all," Emma whispered. "Every single one. Even when I was far away, even when I made those terrible choices, I kept them close to my heart." Lucas pointed to his scribbled crayon masterpiece from 2 years ago. "That's my dinosaur." "And a magnificent dinosaur it is," Maggie said, ruffling his hair. In the kitchen, while the children played in their room, Maggie prepared their favorite snacks and thought about the conversation she'd had with David the night before. "I want to do something with the money," she'd told him. "Something that matters." "What do you mean?" "I want to start a financial literacy program for single parents. Teach them about investing, saving, building security for their families. Partner with community centers and churches." She'd paused. "I want to turn what I learned into something that helps other families avoid the mistakes we made." David's eyes had filled with pride. "Mom, that's incredible. But are you sure? It's a big undertaking." "I'm 68 years old, David. If not now, when? I've spent decades building wealth just for the sake of security. I want to spend whatever time I have left building something meaningful." Now, as she watched Emma help Lucas with a puzzle, Maggie felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years. Not the fragile peace of isolation, but the deep contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Interview went great. David might get the position. How are things there? Maggie sent back a photo of the children playing together, both of them grinning at the camera. Sarah's response was immediate, perfect. We'll be home in an hour. Pizza for dinner? I'll order it now, Maggie typed back. As she called the pizza place, Emma wandered into the kitchen. Grandma, I'm sorry I said I hated you. Maggie knelt down to Emma's level. Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to apologize for that. You were hurt and scared, and those were honest feelings. But I didn't really hate you. I was just sad. I know, my love. And I'm sorry I made you sad. I'm sorry I made choices that hurt you and Lucas. Emma wrapped her arms around Maggie's neck. Are we a family again? We never stopped being a family, Maggie said, holding her granddaughter close. Sometimes families go through hard times, and sometimes people make mistakes. But love doesn't disappear just because things get difficult. Even when people are really, really mad? Even then. Love is stronger than anger, sweetheart. It just sometimes takes time to remember that. When David and Sarah returned an hour later, they found Maggie and the children building an elaborate blanket fort in the living room. Pizza boxes sat empty on the counter, and everyone was laughing. How did it go? Maggie asked, emerging from under a blanket draped over two chairs. He got the job, Sarah said, her smile reaching her eyes for the first time in months. Better salary, better benefits, and they're even paying for him to finish his MBA. David looked around the cozy apartment, at his children playing peacefully, at his wife relaxed and happy, at his mother glowing with contentment. You know what I realized today, he said. We spent so much time worrying about financial security that we almost lost the thing that actually makes us secure, each other. Maggie reached over and squeezed his hand. The money was never the real treasure, David. It was always this. It was always family. As the evening wound down and they prepared to head home, Lucas climbed into Maggie's lap one more time. I love you, Gamma Maggie, he said sleepily. I love you too, little one. More than all the stars in the sky. Emma joined them on the couch. Can we come back tomorrow? You can come back anytime you want, Maggie promised. I'm not going anywhere ever again. Looking around at her family, imperfect, sometimes difficult, but infinitely precious, Maggie finally understood what true wealth looked like. It looked like this moment, this love, this choice to stay and fight for each other instead of running away when things got hard. It looked like home. 6 months later, on a warm spring morning, Maggie stood in the community center where she just finished teaching her third financial literacy class. 23 single parents had attended today's session on emergency funds and investment basics, and the energy in the room had been electric with hope and determination. Mrs. Chen called Maria, a young mother of 2 who worked double shifts at the hospital. Thank you for showing us that it's never too late to start building something better for our children. As the participants filed out, clutching their folders of information and savings account applications, Maggie felt a profound sense of purpose. The Margaret Chen Financial Empowerment Program had grown beyond her wildest dreams, partnering with 12 community centers across the city and helping over 300 families in just 6 months. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Don't forget, Emma's spring concert is at 2 p.m. She's been practicing her solo all week. Maggie smiled, gathering her materials. These days, her calendar was full not just with classes and financial consultations, but with school concerts, soccer games, bedtime stories, and family dinners. She'd found the perfect balance between meaningful work and being present for the people who mattered most. The drive to Emma's school took her past the house where everything had changed almost a year ago. David and Sarah had used part of Maggie's financial help to refinance at a better rate and make home improvements, but more importantly, they'd learned to communicate about money stress instead of letting it fester. Sarah had returned to work part-time, pursuing her passion for graphic design, while David thrived in his new position. At the school, Maggie found her family in the auditorium. Sarah waved her over to a saved seat, baby Michael gurgling happily in her arms. He was crawling now, a chubby 9-month-old with David's serious eyes and Sarah's mischievous smile. "How was class today?" Sarah asked, shifting to make room. "Wonderful." Maria opened her first savings account, and James is planning to start a small business with his tax refund instead of spending it. Maggie settled into her seat, reaching over to tickle Michael's chin. "How's this little guy doing?" "He said gamma yesterday," Sarah said with a grin. "Clear as day." "David thinks it was just babbling, but I know better." The lights dimmed, and the third-grade choir took the stage. Emma stood in the front row, wearing a blue dress with her hair in neat braids, searching the audience until she spotted her family. Her face lit up with a smile so radiant it made Maggie's heart ache with joy. As the children began to sing "What a Wonderful World," Maggie felt tears prick her eyes. Emma's voice rose clear and sweet above the others during her solo. "I see trees of green, red roses too, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world." In that moment, watching her granddaughter sing with such confidence and happiness, Maggie reflected on the journey that had brought them all here. The pain, the mistakes, the long months of separation that had nearly destroyed them, all of it had led to this deeper understanding of what truly mattered. After the concert, the family gathered at David and Sarah's house for their weekly Sunday dinner. It had become a tradition, these weekly meals where 3 generations came together to share food, stories, and laughter. "Gamma, guess what?" Lucas announced as they sat around the dinner table. "I'm going to be in the preschool play next month, and I get to be a tree." "A tree? How exciting!" "I'll make sure to have my camera ready," Maggie said, serving him another spoonful of the mashed potatoes he loved. "And I'm helping him practice his lines," Emma added importantly. "He has to say 'I provide shade for the animals,' but he keeps saying 'I provide snacks for the animals.'" The table erupted in laughter, Lucas giggling the loudest even though he didn't quite understand the joke. As the evening wound down and the children played quietly in the living room, Maggie helped Sarah with the dishes while David got Michael ready for bed. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said quietly, drying a plate with more attention than necessary. Maggie looked up from the sink, suddenly alert. "What is it?" "I've been thinking a lot about forgiveness lately. About what it really means." Sarah set down the plate and turned to face her. "For months after you came back, I thought forgiveness meant pretending the hurt never happened. But I've realized it's something different." "What do you mean?" "Forgiveness means choosing love even when you remember the pain. It means deciding that the relationship is more important than being right." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "And I want you to know that I forgive you, Mom. Completely. Not just for the children's sake, but because I love you and I want our family to be whole." Maggie set down the dish she was washing and pulled Sarah into a fierce hug. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm so grateful for it." "We all deserve forgiveness," Sarah whispered. "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after we realize we were wrong." Later that evening, after the children were in bed and Sarah and David were watching a movie, Maggie sat in the rocking chair in Michael's nursery, holding her youngest grandchild as he drifted off to sleep. Through the window, she could see the guest house where she'd lived before everything fell apart. David had converted it into a home office and art studio for Sarah, but sometimes Maggie still remembered those final mornings there, packing her suitcase with such anger and hurt. "You know what, little one," she whispered to Michael, who was making soft sleeping sounds against her shoulder. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead to the best things that happen to us. Sometimes we have to lose everything to realize what we actually have." Michael stirred slightly, his tiny hand grasping her finger with surprising strength. "Your family almost broke apart before you were born," she continued softly. "But we put it back together, piece by piece, with love and forgiveness and lots of hard conversations. And now you get to grow up in a family that knows how precious it is to have each other." David appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a soft smile. "Mom, you don't have to rock him to sleep every time you're here." "Yes, I do," Maggie said firmly. "I miss too many moments with Emma and Lucas when they were babies because I was working so much. I won't miss these moments with Michael." David entered the room and sat in the chair beside her. I've been thinking about what you said last year, about learning what kind of man you raised. David. No, let me finish. You raised a man who makes mistakes, sometimes terrible ones. But you also raised a man who can admit when he's wrong, who can ask for forgiveness, and who puts his family above his pride. He reached over and touched his son's sleeping face. I hope I can raise my children to be even better than that. You will, Maggie said with absolute certainty. Because you've learned that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present, being honest, and never giving up on each other. As they sat together in the quiet nursery, 3 generations of their family under one roof, Maggie felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. Not the hollow satisfaction of financial security, but the deep peace that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Outside, spring was blooming in the garden Emma had helped her plant, flowers that would return year after year, just like the love that bound their family together. Love that had been tested and broken and rebuilt stronger than before. Love that had finally brought them all home.